The night was cold and eerily still as the Secret Service paranormal investigation team arrived at the abandoned Eloise Asylum in Detroit. A massive structure that once housed thousands of the mentally ill, it now stood as a decaying tomb, filled with stories of horrors long forgotten until now. The wind howled through the broken windows like the cries of long-dead patients. Sergeant Jack Marston, the no-nonsense leader of the team, felt an unsettling chill run down his spine as he stepped out of the armored van. He hated these kinds of jobs, especially ones that involved things no one could explain. "All right, team, gear up," he barked, masking his nerves. "We've got a job to do." The team, consisting of 5 highly trained paranormal investigators, each with their own specialty, grabbed their ghost-hunting equipment: thermal cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, and motion sensors. They were used to dealing with ghosts, but this was something else. The report spoke of crawlers, shadow men, and something worse, something no one could name. "It smells like death," muttered Agent Sam, a tech expert, adjusting his headlamp. "They say anyone who enters never leaves." "Let's hope we're not the exception," Marston replied half-jokingly. As they stepped through the main entrance, the atmosphere immediately changed. The temperature dropped 10 degrees, and the thick, suffocating air seemed to press in on them. Their footsteps echoed unnaturally through the long, dark corridors. The asylum seemed to breathe, as if it was alive and watching them. Agent Lucy, the team's medium, placed a hand on the wall and flinched. "There's something here, something angry," she whispered. Her voice was shaky, and that wasn't like her. She'd been through dozens of these cases, but Eloise was different. They proceeded deeper into the asylum, the dilapidated walls lined with rusting metal bed frames and torn-up patient files. As they walked, distant whispers could be heard, faint at first, but slowly growing louder. "Can anyone else hear that?" Marston asked, stopping dead in his tracks. The team froze. A strange voice was coming from the far end of the hall. Low and guttural, it whispered their names, one by one. A sudden gust of wind slammed a nearby door shut, sending an echo that reverberated through the asylum like a warning. "Jesus Christ," Agent Jake muttered. "This place isn't right." Suddenly, their EMF detectors went haywire, spiking off the charts. Without warning, a shadow darted across the corridor ahead of them. "What was that?" Sam yelled, raising his thermal camera. But the figure was gone. "We keep moving," Marston commanded, though his own heart was racing. "No stopping." But then the laughter began. A distorted, maniacal giggle echoed from somewhere deeper inside the asylum. The lights on their equipment flickered. Sam's thermal camera suddenly picked up movement. A figure crouched in the corner of the room up ahead, its limbs twisted unnaturally, too long to be human. "Guys, we've got movement." "Something's," Sam started, but he was cut off by a sickening crack. The figure bolted towards them on all fours, impossibly fast. Its eyes, hollow and glowing red, locked onto Marston as it came closer. "Run!" Marston shouted, but before they could react, the creature slammed into Sam, dragging him into the darkness, his screams echoing through the halls. Chaos erupted. The team scrambled in panic, but the sound of Sam's screams was quickly replaced by silence. The crawlers had claimed their first victim. The group staggered through the next corridor, panic gripping them tightly. The asylum, now fully awake, seemed to close in around them. Doors that were once open now slammed shut. Lights flickered erratically, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. Marston gritted his teeth, refusing to show the fear clawing at his chest. Sam was gone, taken by the crawler, but they had to keep moving. They had to stay together. Lucy's voice broke the tense silence. "We should have left the moment we stepped in here. I've never felt anything like this. It's feeding off us. It knows we're afraid." "It's too late now," Marston growled. "We need to find Sam, alive or dead." As they rounded another corner, their motion sensors picked up movement all around them, but there was nothing visible on the thermal cams. Jake's breathing was ragged as he whispered, "We're not alone. There's more of them." Suddenly, a loud thump echoed from behind them, as if something massive had dropped from the ceiling. They spun around, weapons raised, but all they saw was the dark hallway stretching into infinity. "Watch the ceilings," Jake muttered, scanning the area above with his flashlight. Those crawlers could be anywhere. Lucy gasped. I can feel it. Something watching us. Something bigger than the crawlers. Just as she said that, the shadows in the hallway began to shift unnaturally. A figure appeared at the far end of the corridor. A tall, imposing shadow man, its form hazy and undefined, yet unmistakably malevolent. It didn't move, just stood there, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow as it stared at them with intent. Back away slowly, Marston ordered. But the moment they moved, the shadow man dissolved into a black mist and charged towards them at an impossible speed. The air grew thick with malevolence, and the walls themselves began to shake violently. We've got to get out of here now. Jake yelled, but there was no escape. The asylum had them trapped, and the demons within were just getting started. The sound of heavy breathing filled the dark hallway as the team pressed on. But they weren't alone. Eloise Asylum's air thickened with something unseen, something malevolent. Sam was gone, lost to the crawlers, but Marston couldn't let his team fall apart. Not yet. Not when they had no idea what was really happening in this cursed place. Everyone stay close, Marston ordered, his voice gruff but steady. The floor creaked under their boots, and the constant echo made it impossible to tell if they were alone or not. Suddenly, the walls of the asylum seemed to close in on them. The temperature dropped even further, and Lucy stopped dead in her tracks. Something's wrong, she whispered, her breath visible in the freezing air. I can feel it, it's like. Before she could finish, the sound of dragging feet echoed through the halls. It was slow, deliberate, as though something was following them, hunting them. The group froze, their lights trembling as they pointed them down the empty corridor. Then came the whisper. One by one, the voice was disembodied, faint, but it sent shivers down everyone's spine. Jake, already on edge, swung his flashlight wildly, but there was nothing, just endless darkness and empty rooms. Who the hell said that? He hissed, panic creeping into his voice. No one answered. The whisper came again, closer now. One by one. Without warning, the flashlight in Jake's hand flickered out. Darkness swallowed him whole. Jake! Marston shouted, but it was too late. A rush of cold wind blasted through the hallway, and when the lights came back on, Jake was gone. Jake! Lucy screamed, darting toward where he'd been standing just moments before. But there was nothing. No sign of struggle, no blood, no trace of him at all. He's gone, Agent Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Just like Sam. Marston gripped his gun tightly, his jaw clenched. We don't leave anyone behind. We keep moving. The second we stop, we're next. Lucy shook her head. You don't understand. This place, it doesn't follow our rules. It doesn't care about guns or gear. It wants us. The team moved in silence, their nerves frayed, the threat of an invisible enemy looming over them. As they turned a corner, the asylum's layout began to twist, its corridors warping unnaturally, leading them in circles. What the hell? Marston growled. We've been here already. The asylum was playing with them now, bending time and space, its labyrinth of hallways wrapping around itself. Keep going, Marston ordered. But as they turned yet another corner, the whispers returned. One by one. This time they were louder, closer. Suddenly, the walls themselves began to move. The cracked tiles on the floor shifted, and the air thickened, making it hard to breathe. Something unseen dragged across the walls, like nails scraping through concrete. A sound so sharp it made Lucy cover her ears. Then, without warning, Jake's voice came through their earpieces. Help! I'm still here. It was faint, distorted, like he was calling from another dimension. Jake! Where are you? Marston barked into his mic, desperation in his voice. They're coming. And then silence. The team stood frozen, listening to the dead air on the other end of Jake's radio signal. Marston's heart pounded in his chest. He had seen soldiers go missing in combat, had heard final words transmitted through broken comms. But this was different. The asylum itself felt alive, feeding off their fear, drawing them further into its depths. We need to get out, Lucy said, her voice shaking. This place isn't just haunted. It's a trap. It wants us, wants to consume us. Before Marston could respond, The lights overhead began to flicker violently. The atmosphere around them thickened like a suffocating blanket. The walls themselves groaned as if in agony. Then the crawling began. From the corners of the room, shadows, twisted and malformed, emerged, dragging themselves across the floor. Their limbs were too long, their movements unnatural, like insects scurrying toward their prey. The temperature dropped so suddenly that their breath turned to ice. "Get ready," Marston shouted, pulling his gun. But deep down, he knew bullets wouldn't stop what was coming for them. The crawlers grew closer, their guttural breathing echoing through the narrow corridor. "They're toying with us," Sarah whispered. "They know we're scared." Lucy raised her EMF detector, and the needle spiked off the charts. "It's off the scale. Whatever's here isn't just a spirit, it's something much darker." Then, the lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness. A cold hand brushed against Sarah's leg, and she screamed, firing blindly into the void. The muzzle flash illuminated the twisted faces of the crawlers, mouths wide open, eyes hollow and dead. In the brief flashes of light, they could see the grotesque figures rushing toward them. "Fall back. Now," Marston ordered, dragging Sarah away from the creatures. But it was too late. One of the crawlers lunged at Sarah, its razor-sharp claws slashing through the air. She shrieked as it latched onto her leg, dragging her to the ground. Blood sprayed across the floor as she struggled to break free. "Sarah, no!" Marston yelled, but as he reached for her, the crawler dragged her into the darkness. Lucy screamed as she fired her weapon into the void, but Sarah's voice was already gone. The asylum had claimed another. The asylum was ravenous, its hunger palpable as it devoured Sarah into the shadows. Marston's mind raced, heart pounding, but his grip remained firm on Lucy's arm. "Lucy, we need to keep moving. Now." She was in shock, staring into the abyss where Sarah had disappeared. The sound of scraping claws on the floor echoed behind them, and Marston knew they had no time to lose. He pulled her harder, yanking her out of her daze. "Move, damn it." They sprinted down the hall, their flashlights flickering, barely illuminating the narrow, crumbling walls around them. Behind them, the sinister sound of the crawlers drew nearer, their guttural breaths echoing like a death rattle. The asylum twisted as if alive, the halls warping into a maddening maze, making escape impossible. Doors appeared where walls should have been, some leading into dark voids, others into twisted reflections of the rooms they had just left. Time and space meant nothing here. They skidded to a halt in front of a dead end, a locked iron door with no handle. "No, no, no," Lucy muttered, pounding on the door in panic. It wasn't here before. Marston tried to catch his breath, looking around desperately for another exit. His flashlight beam caught something, the glint of rusted metal embedded in the wall beside them. He squinted and moved closer. It was an old elevator shaft, its doors slightly ajar, revealing a pitch-black void inside. "This is our only shot," he muttered, yanking the doors wider. The inside was dark and smelled of decay. He could hear the distant rattle of chains from deep below. "You can't be serious," Lucy whispered, terror in her eyes. "Would you rather wait for them?" Marston gestured to the distant scraping of the crawlers, their twisted figures already appearing at the far end of the corridor. Without another word, Lucy followed him into the shaft. The only way was down. They climbed inside, their feet barely touching the rusty cables as the elevator creaked and groaned beneath their weight. Slowly, they began to descend, their breaths ragged and shallow. As they reached the lower level, the whispers returned. "You can't run forever." The voice was no longer disembodied. It came from inside the elevator, surrounding them in the dark. One by one, the elevator jolted violently, sending them crashing to the ground. Marston's head spun, his vision blurring as he struggled to stand. The doors creaked open, revealing the basement of the asylum. It was a massive underground chamber, unlike anything they had seen before, lined with rows of rusted hospital beds, strange surgical instruments hanging from the ceiling like macabre decorations. The walls were covered in rotting, yellowed wallpaper, stained with blood and something darker. A deep chill settled over them, colder than anything they had felt upstairs. "This place, it feels wrong," Lucy whispered, clutching her flashlight tighter. It's like the heart of the asylum. Marston was about to respond when a shadow darted across the room, fast and low to the ground. His flashlight caught the briefest glimpse, a figure impossibly thin and hunched, with long, jagged limbs scurrying between the beds. "Stay alert," he growled, gripping his gun tighter. The whispering intensified. Closer now. A metallic clattering echoed through the chamber, followed by soft, dragging footsteps. Marston's skin prickled with unease. He motioned for Lucy to move toward the back wall, toward a door he hoped would lead them out. But just as they started moving, the shadows moved with them. From behind the rows of beds, figures began to emerge, twisted, deformed patients with hollow eyes and gaping mouths. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, like broken marionettes on invisible strings. "Oh God!" Lucy's voice was barely audible, trembling with fear. The figures were closing in on them, their pale, lifeless faces locked in a grotesque grin. They moved slowly, but relentlessly, cutting off any path to the door. "We're not getting out of here without a fight," Marston said, his voice low and tense. He raised his gun, but something told him bullets weren't going to stop whatever these things were. As the first patient lunged, Marston fired, the gunshot echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. The bullet tore through the figure, but it didn't stop. It kept coming, unfazed by the gaping hole in its chest. "We need to run," Lucy screamed, backing away as more of the twisted patients closed in. Marston fired again, but it was hopeless. The figures didn't bleed, didn't scream. They were already dead, and they wanted to take the living with them. Marston grabbed Lucy by the arm and bolted toward the door, adrenaline pushing them through the mass of undead patients. The figures lunged at them, clawing and gnashing, but the pair managed to dodge and weave their way through the chaos, barely making it to the exit. Marston kicked the door open, and they stumbled into a narrow stone corridor. The air was damp and thick with decay, but it was better than the hellish chamber they had just escaped. They slammed the door behind them, the sound of scratching and banging echoing from the other side as the patients tried to break through. "We can't keep doing this," Lucy panted, leaning against the wall. "It's like they know our every move." Marston leaned against the door, catching his breath. "There's got to be another way out. Something we missed." He shone his flashlight down the corridor, revealing a set of iron stairs spiraling downward into the dark. "Do we really have to go deeper?" Lucy groaned, staring down into the black void below. "We don't have a choice," Marston said grimly, leading the way. "We need to find out what's really going on here." The stairs groaned under their weight as they descended, each step echoing ominously. At the bottom, they found themselves in a small, dimly lit room, a cellar filled with dusty old files, crates, and forgotten equipment. But at the far end of the room was something that caught Marston's eye. A rusty metal door, chained shut with heavy iron locks. "Look at this," he muttered, approaching the door. The chains were old, but sturdy, wrapped around the door tightly as if to keep something, or someone, inside. "What is this place?" Lucy asked, looking around at the crates and forgotten equipment. "It looks like it hasn't been touched in decades." Marston knelt down and examined the locks. "This place has a lot of secrets, and I'm willing to bet the answers we need are behind this door." Lucy shivered. "You really want to open it?" He nodded grimly. "Whatever's happening in this asylum, it all starts and ends here." With a final pull, Marston broke the lock. The chains clattered to the ground, and the door creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow tunnel leading even deeper into the earth. From the darkness ahead, they heard the faintest sound. A whisper. The tunnel yawned before them, swallowing the light from their flashlights as if it were alive. Every inch of the stone walls was slick with condensation, and the air was colder here, as though they had stepped into the very bowels of the asylum. It wasn't just cold, it was suffocating. Marston led the way, his gun at the ready, though he knew deep down that bullets wouldn't stop what awaited them. Lucy followed closely, her face pale, hands trembling, though she kept her flashlight steady. There was something oppressive about the tunnel. It wasn't just the darkness. It was a sense of being watched, of something ancient waiting for them at the end of their journey. "How far does this go?" Lucy whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of their footsteps. "No idea," Marston muttered. But we're not turning back now. They continued in silence, their footsteps echoing ominously through the narrow passage. As they pressed on, the whispering grew louder, though it wasn't coming from ahead. It seemed to seep from the very walls, wrapping around them like a sickening lullaby. Marston's skin crawled as he realized the whispers weren't random. They were calling his name. Marston! He stopped abruptly, spinning around. Lucy was still behind him, wide-eyed. But there was no one else. No figures in the dark. Just the two of them. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice tense. Lucy nodded, swallowing hard. "It's been saying my name too." They pushed forward, but with every step, the voices grew louder, more insistent, pulling at their minds. The tunnel began to twist, no longer a straight path, but a spiraling, disorienting descent. The walls themselves seemed to move, warping and closing in on them. Suddenly, the ground beneath Lucy's feet gave way, and she let out a scream as she tumbled into the darkness. "Lucy!" Marston shouted, diving to the edge of the pit that had opened beneath her. His flashlight revealed her hanging onto the edge of a rocky ledge, feet dangling into an abyss that seemed to have no bottom. "Hold on!" Marston reached out, grabbing her arm and pulling her back up with a grunt. Panting and shaken, Lucy scrambled to her feet. "What the hell is happening?" Before he could answer, a low growl echoed from the pit below. Something was down there, something alive and hungry. "We have to move," Marston said, pulling her along as the growl grew louder. They scrambled through the tunnel, which seemed to pulse and twist around them like a living organism, growing tighter and darker with every step. Just as they rounded a corner, the tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, an ancient, forgotten place beneath the asylum. At the center was a stone altar, stained with dark, dried blood. Strange markings covered the walls, symbols that seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light. "Oh my God!" Lucy gasped, backing away from the altar. "What is this place?" Marston approached the altar cautiously, his flashlight sweeping over the symbols. They weren't just random carvings. They were ritual markings, old and malevolent, meant to trap something. "Someone was summoning something down here," he said quietly. "Something that was never meant to be let loose." Before they could react, a loud crash sounded from behind them. The tunnel they had come through collapsed, trapping them in the chamber. "We're not alone," Marston whispered, raising his gun as the shadows in the chamber began to shift. From the far corner of the room, a figure stepped into the dim light, tall, gaunt, and draped in tattered clothing. Its eyes glowed a sickly yellow, and its mouth stretched into an inhuman grin. It wasn't a crawler. It wasn't a skinwalker. It was something far worse. The figure loomed over them, its body impossibly thin, like a shadow given form. The air in the chamber grew colder still, and the thing's glowing eyes fixed on Marston and Lucy, as if sizing them up. "You've come far," it said in a voice that was not human, a guttural rasp that seemed to scrape the inside of Marston's skull. "But now the real fun begins." Lucy took a step back, her eyes wide with terror. What is that?" "A demon," Marston whispered, his grip tightening on his gun. "The thing they summoned, it's still here." The demon laughed, a low, rumbling sound that reverberated through the chamber. "You cannot fight me, little hunters. You are but flies caught in a web you cannot see." Marston fired a shot, more out of instinct than strategy. The bullet passed straight through the demon's form, as though it were made of smoke. The creature didn't even flinch. "Guns? Really?" The demon grinned wider, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. "You're in my world now." Before Marston could react, the demon lunged, moving faster than anything human. It swept past him like a shadow, and suddenly Lucy was yanked into the air, her scream echoing through the chamber as the demon wrapped its long, clawed fingers around her throat. "Let her go," Marston shouted, raising his gun again, but the demon only squeezed tighter, choking the life out of her. "You amuse me," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. "But I don't need both of you. One will do for my purposes." In a surge of desperation, Marston charged the demon, swinging the butt of his gun like a club. It passed through the creature harmlessly, but it was enough to distract it. Lucy fell to the ground, gasping for breath. "You will regret that," the demon snarled, its eyes blazing with fury. Suddenly, the walls of the chamber began to close in. The ancient stone groaned and cracked as the room itself seemed to collapse around them. The altar shook violently, and the strange symbols on the walls glowed with a faint, sickly light. The ritual's not done, Marston realized, pulling Lucy to her feet. It's using the energy to tear this place apart. The demon lunged again, but this time Marston was ready. He grabbed one of the iron chains that had been wrapped around the altar, swinging it wildly. The chain seemed to have some effect on the demon, causing it to recoil with a hiss as the cold metal passed through its form. "Go!" Marston shouted to Lucy. "Get to the door." But there was no door, no escape route. The chamber was sealed tight, and the demon was blocking their only way out. The ground beneath them began to tremble, and cracks appeared in the floor, opening up into dark, bottomless pits. From those pits, twisted, deformed hands began to rise, crawlers, summoned by the demon to finish them off. "Don't let them touch you," Marston yelled, dodging the grasping hands as they clawed at his legs. Lucy screamed as a crawler latched onto her ankle, pulling her toward the pit. Marston swung the chain again, striking the crawler and sending it slithering back into the darkness. But more were coming, climbing out of the pits like maggots from a rotting corpse. "We can't hold them off forever," Lucy cried, backing away as the crawlers surrounded them. Marston's mind raced. The altar, the ritual, the chains. "If we break the altar," he said, his voice tense, "we might be able to stop the ritual, but we have to act fast." Lucy nodded, terror in her eyes, but determination as well. "Let's do it," she said, grabbing the other end of the chain. Together, they wrapped the chain around the altar, pulling with all their strength as the crawlers closed in. The demon watched, its eyes glowing with fury, but it was too late to stop them. With a final, deafening crack, the altar shattered, and the chamber exploded in a blinding flash of light. When the blinding light faded, silence enveloped the chamber. Marston and Lucy lay sprawled on the cold stone floor, disoriented but alive. The shattered altar lay in pieces before them, but the demon was nowhere to be seen. For a moment, there was hope. Had they done it? Was it over? Then a low, guttural laugh echoed from the walls. "You thought it would be that easy?" The voice was distorted now, more primal, as if the demon had shed its human guise entirely. "You've broken the altar, but you've also unleashed something far worse." The ground beneath them shook violently, and the stone walls began to warp and twist, like the asylum itself was alive and suffering. From the cracks in the floor, thick black smoke poured out, filling the room with the stench of sulfur and decay. Lucy scrambled to her feet, her breathing ragged. "What the hell is happening?" Marston, still dazed, struggled to stand. "We broke the ritual, but that doesn't mean we stopped it. Whatever it was holding back is free now." Before they could react, the air in the chamber began to vibrate, and the smoke coalesced into a shape, a massive, hulking figure with glowing red eyes and horns that scraped the ceiling. This was no ordinary demon. It was something far more ancient and powerful. It was the devil himself. "You freed me," the creature growled, its voice a deep, menacing rumble. "And now I will feast on your souls." Lucy's flashlight flickered in her hand as she took a step back. This can't be real. This isn't happening. But it was all too real. The devil raised one massive clawed hand, and the ground beneath them split open, revealing the burning pits of hell. From the fiery depths, skeletal figures clawed their way out, legions of the damned, their bodies twisted and broken, their eyes hollow and soulless. Marston grabbed Lucy's arm, pulling her back. "We need to get out of here. Now." But there was nowhere to run. The walls had sealed shut, trapping them in with the devil and his minions. The skeletal figures closed in on them, their bony fingers reaching for their flesh, their mouths open in silent screams. "We can't fight them all," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. "We're going to die here." Marston's eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of hope, any possible way to escape. Then he saw it. On the far wall, hidden in the shadows, was an ancient door, half covered in rubble. It was old and weathered, but it looked like their only chance. "There!" he shouted, pointing. "The door. We can make it if we move now." Lucy nodded, fear giving way to determination. They sprinted toward the door, dodging the skeletal hands that reached for them. The devil roared in fury, but they were too fast, too desperate to let it catch them now. They reached the door, and Marston threw his shoulder against it, breaking the rusted lock with a loud crack. The door swung open, revealing a narrow, twisting staircase that descended into darkness. "Go!" Marston yelled, pushing Lucy forward. "I'll hold them off." But before Lucy could protest, the devil's roar filled the chamber, shaking the very foundations of the asylum. The skeletal figures surged forward, and Marston fired his gun, the bullets doing little more than slowing them down. Lucy hesitated at the top of the stairs. "Marston, come on. I'm right behind you," he lied, knowing full well that if he stayed behind, she might have a chance. But as the devil approached, its massive claws reaching out for him, Marston felt the overwhelming weight of despair. There was no winning this fight. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light filled the chamber, and a voice echoed through the darkness. "You've played your part, Marston. Now it's time for the real battle." The devil recoiled, its glowing red eyes narrowing. From the light, figures began to emerge. The ghosts of those who had died in the asylum, their bodies twisted and broken, but their spirits burning with a vengeance. The final battle had begun. Marston stood frozen as the ghosts swirled around him, their forms glowing with a pale, ethereal light. The devil growled in fury, lashing out with its massive claws, but the spirits were relentless, their rage tangible. "You will not escape," the devil roared, its voice shaking the entire asylum. It lunged forward, but the ghosts pushed back, their power holding it at bay. Lucy, standing at the top of the stairs, watched in horror as the battle unfolded. "Marston, we have to go. This place is coming down." But Marston couldn't move. He was transfixed by the scene before him, the spirits of the asylum's victims fighting back against the evil that had claimed them. They were giving him a chance, one final shot at stopping the devil once and for all. Suddenly, one of the spirits, a woman in a tattered hospital gown, turned to Marston. Her face was twisted in anguish, but her eyes were clear. "You must finish it," she whispered. "The key is in the altar." Marston's heart raced. The altar, of course. The broken altar was the source of the ritual. If they could destroy it completely, it might sever the devil's connection to the world. With renewed purpose, Marston sprinted toward the shattered remains of the altar, dodging the skeletal figures still crawling from the pits. Behind him, the ghosts continued their assault on the devil, but it was clear they were weakening. "Hurry!" Lucy screamed, watching as the walls of the asylum began to crack and crumble. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling, and the ground trembled violently beneath their feet. Marston reached the altar, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The stone was cracked, but not completely destroyed. He grabbed one of the chains still lying on the floor and wrapped it around the largest piece of the altar. "Help me!" he yelled to Lucy. She ran over, grabbing the other end of the chain. Together, they pulled with all their strength, the altar groaning and creaking as it began to give way. The ground beneath them shook violently, and the devil let out a deafening roar. With one final, desperate tug, the altar crumbled into dust. A deafening explosion of light filled the chamber, and the devil's scream echoed through the asylum, a sound so terrifying it seemed to freeze time itself. The skeletal figures collapsed, turning to ash as the light consumed them. The walls cracked and groaned, and the ceiling began to cave in. "Run!" Marston shouted, pulling Lucy toward the stairs. They sprinted up the twisting staircase as the asylum collapsed around them, debris falling in all directions. Behind them, the devil's roar faded into nothingness, and the light that had consumed the chamber flickered and died. They burst through the door at the top of the stairs, gasping for air as they stumbled into the cold night. Behind them, the asylum collapsed in on itself, a deafening crash that sent dust and debris flying into the air. For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching as the once mighty structure crumbled to the ground. "It's over," Lucy whispered, her voice trembling. Marston nodded, his body aching with exhaustion. "Yeah, it's over." But as they turned to leave, a chill ran down Marston's spine. From the wreckage of the asylum, a low, guttural laugh echoed through the night. The devil was not gone. Not yet,